If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What is one thing you are 100% sure you've seen, but people would say you are crazy if you said you've seen it? Wendigo, Bigfoot, skinwalkers, werewolves, UFOs, etc. I am completely sure that I found Wendigo tracks here on a bushwalk in my homeland of New Zealand. I was out pig hunting with my uncle after a heavy deluge of rain. Now this is thick bush, not unlike this image. Now while we were walking towards where we tracked the kune, my uncle noticed these hoof prints not unlike a horse's, very similar in size and shape. In bushes like these it is impossible for a horse to walk around, and the tracks were not like usual horse tracks with 4 prints, but 2 prints like a biped and spaced like something that was at the very least 6 foot. The foliage was pretty scraped around the tracks and went further inland than we like to go, especially after the rain where slips are possible. My uncle said that he knew there were some caves about 2 clicks in the direction of the tracks. Needless to say, we noped out of there. My old house was spooky. It was only about 10 years old, but the previous owner killed himself in the attic, with a big game gun nonetheless. One day, my friend and I were sitting in my attic, which was fully finished, and was more or less a separate apartment type loft. It was December, so no windows were open. The door to the small bedroom was shut entirely. We were just chatting or whatever, when the doorknob to the bedroom turned and the door opened all the way. It then slowly shut again and latched. Although we were freaked out, we opened the door to the entirely empty room, and no one was in it. I suspected my brother at first. I can't think of any explanation. About 3 years later, my mom and brother and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV. Out of nowhere, a layer of black fog, about 3 feet in the air and a few inches thick, drifted into the living room and surrounded us. We all looked around at each other, not saying anything. A few seconds later, it dissipated. We aren't at all sure what it was or how it got there. A werewolf. The thing was standing at my window, beckoning me to come to the window. I remember this thing vividly from when I was 6 years old, the way the moonlight shined across its shoulders, the glistening snout mere inches away from the glass spreading fog from its breath, the way its ears twitched when it realized I had awoken and was aware of its presence. It was tapping on the glass with its index finger, slowly and forcefully. Once I woke up and looked around, I saw its silhouette at the window. I shook my head as hard as I could, trying to wake myself up, but when I refocused my eyes on the window, it was still there. I don't remember how long I sat there pressed against the wall just staring at the beast. I just remember waking up the next morning. The closest thing I've ever seen in a movie is the Lycans in the Underworld movie franchise. It looked almost identical. I would have chalked it up to my imagination and remember the movie, but this was when I was 18 years ago. About 7 years ago, myself and 4 friends were hanging out in a forest across my house. We live in South Africa and this forest spans what must be 8 km long. We were sitting there, making a small fire, as it was getting dark and we heard rustling in the bushes about 100 meters from us. We all stood up and we grabbed the panga, machete, because it could have been a bush pig as they're common in my area and are quite aggressive. This rustling in the bushes was getting louder and moving towards us, then it started screaming. I shit you not, it screamed like a man would scream at the top of his lungs, but only higher pitched. It got closer and so did the screams until eventually it reached the opening in the bushes we cleared to make our fire. Out of 4 of us, we all saw it, but nobody could distinguish what it was. It was about half a meter tall and pitch black fur, standing bipedal. Still screaming this fucking horrifying high-pitched scream, and it just stood there, about 5 meters from us. My friend with the panga stood in front, and as soon as he lifted the panga in a defensive manner, so as to swing it whatever it may be if it comes at us, it stopped screaming and darted back into the bushes. I grew up in the bushes and have caught and encountered all manner of creatures, but never in my life have I experienced something like that. Utterly terrifying. My wife was commuting back from her job around 10 p.m. one winter night about 4 years ago. She was telling me about her day, when suddenly she let out an abrupt "what in the fuck?" She said she just passed what appeared to be a dead male deer in a ditch, not uncommon in Nee, Alabama, but it had a short face and cat-like paws. She told me she'd call me back and was going to turn around to see what it was, but after getting the car turned back around, nothing was there. Baffled, we wrote it off as a long day at work and her mind/shadows playing tricks on her. Flash forward a few weeks. We're at a small party at friend's house and somehow my wife's story got brought up. She shared her story, and our friends Ryan and Cody looked at each other. Cody looked pale and uneasy, and Ryan made a nervous chuckle. I remember this distinctly because Ryan never looks nervous or uncomfortable, and he was drenched in discomfort at that moment. He shared that 5 years prior, He and Cody were driving down back roads in the early hours of the morning, or late hours of the night, as it was their case. They turned down one such road to see what appeared to be a deer crossing the road that had turned its head towards the car, staring at the headlights. Ryan said it had antlers, a much shorter snout than that of a deer, paws instead of hooves, and a long tail. Cody confirmed these details and said the face was almost human. The creature nonchalantly turned its head forward and casually continued to walk into the woods. If that isn't weird enough, in the middle of them sharing this story, our friend Matt arrives to the party. Matt walked in, said hey, and was making his way to the refrigerator as Ryan was describing what they saw. Matt stopped in his tracks, whipped around, and said, "Are you fucking lying right now?" Matt's tan face was uncharacteristically flush, almost like he was embarrassed. He said that hearing Ryan describe the creature sent chills up his spine and made his eyes water. A few months prior, Matt and his sister were driving to a family function and saw what appeared to be a creature fitting Ryan's description spring across the road, leap a fence, and keep running into the woods. Matt said he thought he was hallucinating until his younger sister asked what kind of animal that was. Of course, Matt had no answer for her. All three of these incidents were within 3 miles of each other. The area is a small town in Nee, Alabama, population 5K, less than 20 square miles, with lots of heavily wooded areas, including the areas immediately surrounding these sightings. I've told this story before. I saw a shadow figure in the winter of 2005. I arrived home from a poker game with friends, at around 3 in the morning. My mother was up late and showering. She said she had had a bad feeling and was happy I was home. I hung up my coat by the window, looked out at the park across the street, and saw it. It moved like a tatter of robes drenched in street light. There was a wispy quality to it, like smoke, but it was solid too. It flowed through the park and headed for my building. I shut the shades and curled into my bed like a little kid. The next afternoon a friend of mine came over. He said there were a horde of cops downstairs and were not letting him in. I went down, got him, and asked the officers what was going on. They wouldn't say. Coldness took me, this wrong feeling that seeped through my insides. I told my friend what I had seen the night before. He thought I was crazy. We arrived on my floor and found a reporter. He said he was looking for the mother of one of the victims. I asked what victim? A police officer murdered his girlfriend and killed himself. His mother lived in the building on the other side. My friend looked at me like I had caused it to happen. I know how this sounds, but I swear on everything I love and hold dear this happened. I can't explain it. Around 6 to 7 years ago my friend and I were leaving my girlfriend's parents' house at dark. We were watching Ice Age and it was a normal, boring high school night. As we round a long corner where the road stops off to a lake, I saw a large brownish/orange creature stand up on 2 legs from behind the weeds at the edge of the road. This Bigfoot-shaped creature had to have been around 8 feet tall to be taller than the weeds while standing in the lake. The headlights of my truck scanned it as I rounded the corner, and that was all I saw of it. I turned my head to look out the back window of my truck and saw my friend staring out of the window. He turned to me with wide eyes, and I knew he had seen it too. I dropped him off at his house a couple miles away and quickly got home where my patents were awake watching TV. My dad saw that I looked confused and was acting weird, so I told him what happened. He offered to drive back to the scene to check it out. We went back and saw nothing. Skip ahead a few years now. I am on YouTube randomly typing in things about my life just to see what comes up. Name, high school, skate parks nearby, and my hometown. I find 3 to 4 videos of a guy with a handheld video camera walking through the county park land in my town, and he is retracing his steps where he saw what he described as a Bigfoot. I got chills. About 3 years ago, I was living in a small town in Southern California called Banning. Up on the hill/mountain that the town sits against is a group of houses we call the Banning Bench. One day I came home from work just as the sun was starting to go down. I stopped outside to my front porch to have a smoke before going inside, and I noticed a few of my neighbors standing down at the end of the street by the empty field. I walked over to go see what they were all doing, and when I walked up they were all pointing further up the hill to a power line tower, one of the big metal ones with the crisscrossing metal beams making up the legs. Up by the tower there was a silhouette of a man leaning against it. Picture someone with their shoulder against a wall with their arms crossed and one leg over the other. Now while this doesn't seem that weird, here's the kicker. This tower was about half a mile away, and about 100 feet high. This guy's shoulder was level with like the third rung, which when I looked at one up close was about 10 feet off the ground, and from half a mile away we could clearly see his outline, tell his arms and legs were crossed, and tell it was a big motherfucker. We stood there looking at it for a good 20 minutes, more people showed up, some talked about calling the police. Then right before the sun went completely down, it stood up straight, stretched, then simply walked away from us over the top of the hill. We all continued to stand there until it was fully dark, unsure about what we had just seen. Then slowly we all convinced ourselves we were crazy or something, and murmurs of having to start dinners or games being on went through the crowd and everyone disappeared. To this day no one has talked about it or spent any time trying to figure out what it was, but every now and then at sunset I'll go out on the porch to have a smoke and look out over the hill wondering what the fuck it was. So I was backpacking with a buddy through the upper Midwest, and we ended up in Kansas, a few hours west of Aurora. We were pretty far off the beaten trail, just following a dirt track. We came across a cluster of dilapidated trailers straddling this little dirt trail, about half a dozen on either side. We sat down about 20 yards from the first trailer, made a fire and ate beans, rice, and leftover squirrel, while we discussed whether to raffle through the trailers and if anyone might be in them. We watched them and ate for about an hour, saw no movement or signs of life, and decided to go ahead and pick through them. To save time, we decided to split the lot. Nate took one side of the trail, I took the other. I had a crank light, so I took it out and gave it a few turns, just to be safe, since it was fully charged, and set off to the first trailer. I didn't find anything of interest, so I used my radio to let Nate know I was moving on to the next. Same story there, though I did find a rotting Lorne magazine and rusty tin cans, so I move on to the next. Nada. He isn't having luck, so I skip the fourth. It had a gaping hole in the front, so I assume it was empty, and head to the furthest trailer from the road. The door handle was popped up solidly, but the door swung right open. So I climb up and it looked habituated. I mean, old, but used. Weird 70s cloth on the little table, slightly stained rug that was a little damp, stains of I don't know what on the stove, and a dirty hobo cup and hobo fork on the countertop. I was surprised, so I tried to radio Nate. My unit squealed, which caught me off guard, and I stumbled over my own foot. I end up on my face against the carpet. How I found out it was damp, and instantly feel something is wrong. The door slams, hard, and I hear some kind of shifting. Like a fat guy in wet socks trying to shuffle along. So, I shine my light down the little hallway, toward the door of the bedroom. My light goes out. And then a light kicks on in that room. With a big shadow right in the middle. I shot up and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was losing it, and I heard the room door open. The light cast around a gigantic figure, and I don't recall if it made a sound, because I decided not to stick around. I ran as fast as I could in that tight space and tackled the nearest window. It gave, and I tumbled through. I got up and sprinted. Straight. Just going. And screaming. No way was I stopping. My radio chirped up after some time running. It was Nate telling me to slow the fuck down. So, I politely screamed at him to shove it. I don't recall passing out. But I woke up the next morning about 2 miles from the park, by Nate's guess, and regaled to him what happened. He never confirmed if anything weird happened, but told me not to talk about it. I was attacked by a lake monster, and me and my friend saw it at least a dozen times. I've lived in Michigan my whole life, and it scared me out of swimming/fishing in anything I can't see the bottom of clearly. I lived on a large lake, we're talking huge, massive even. If you wanted to get from one end to the other, you needed a boat, because swimming it was not for the faint of heart. And the bottom of this lake was pitch black, darker than the city sky. Me and my friends, one in particular who we well call Todd, used to go swimming in Todd's backyard almost every day, because he had a nice man-made beachfront area, and the cleanest area of the lake. We were about 8 to 9 at the time, and one day when we were inside playing Armored Core, we heard his dog barking, and then yelping. We run outside, and there's just blood all over the beach, and his dog has a huge gash in its leg and is soaked to the bone. Ugliest wound I've ever seen. He ended up being alright, and they cleaned the beach up, but it was still kinda shocking. A few weeks later though, we're out on our raft, a super ghetto thing we put together with some nails, duct tape, 2x4s and those huge water jugs for office coolers, and I fall off the raft because it was so poorly made standing on it was almost suicide. We laughed about it, and out of nowhere, Todd started to freak. I thought he was joking, or just trying to play me, and then I had this horrible tearing pain in my leg, and I nearly got pulled under, probably would have if I didn't grab the raft and almost flip it. Eventually it lets go and Todd helps pull me on the raft, and I've got these huge holes in my leg, at least 6 or 7. After a quick trip to the doctor, and a few days recovery, I started going back to the lake with my friends, but me and Todd were way too shaken to swim. We'd just sit there and watch the water, or go inside and game, but whenever we'd look out at the lake, we'd see something moving. Jump forward about 9 years and I've long since moved away, and I get a call from Todd, telling me they found the lake monster. Turns out it was a 4.5-foot pike. Someone who moved into the apartment complex near the lake, and just fished it out one day when out on his paddle boat. I spent the entire day on the beach, talking with Todd, laughing about how it had robbed us of our happy childhood. We went inside, played some ROMs on his PC, and we went for one final walk around the lake, as we used to do when we were kids. And I shit you not, we looked in the water and saw a shadow way bigger than 4 feet, and I hauled ass out of there like I saw a hive of Japanese wasps, and I haven't gone back since. One night I was looking out my window when I saw 3 distinct lights off in the distance in the sky. They kind of looked how lights from planes would, only these lights were bigger and they weren't moving. At first I thought I was seeing stars or planets or something, but I could not take my eyes off these lights for some reason. I just got this feeling there was something weird about them. Then, they started to move. It wasn't horizontally like a plane would move, but they moved vertically, with all 3 lights being in sync. This really began to make me uneasy, just because I had never seen anything in the sky move in the way those 3 lights were. I kept watching them trying to figure out what they were until they just disappeared in the blink of an eye, literally. I still have no idea what I saw, but I've never brought it up to anybody because I know they'd just dismiss it as a plane or satellite or something. I don't know if this qualifies as supernatural because of how insignificant it is, but one night I'm tossing and turning because my bed is basically made of plywood and steel girders. I sit up to re-evaluate my life by placing my face in my hands, and upon such action, I hear a clack. I promptly shit my shorts and look in the direction of the noise. I notice that my Elmer's glue stick fell over. It's lying on my table now, and I'm staring at it while sitting in stool, and then it starts to roll off my table and drop to the floor. Not a single window was open. No one was in the room, and my table isn't angled to the point where shit just topples over all the time. Needless to say, I threw the glue stick out and never experienced any more arts and crafts possessions. About 8 or 9 years ago, an ex-boyfriend and I were driving along a service road that runs along the Mississippi River in a very wooded area in St. Paul at about 11 p.m. It was the fall and unseasonably warm out, so we were just out driving around. We get about a mile down this road, when all of a sudden, out of the canopy of trees, something flew down at the windshield. All I can describe it as, and I will swear on all that matters to me, was the stereotypical face of the devil, including giant wings. Without exaggeration, the wingspan itself was at least 6 to 8 feet across and it had the body shape of a human. I slammed on my brakes and swerved into a 180-degree stop. I immediately started screaming, "Did you see that?" I looked at my ex-boyfriend who was as pale as a ghost and he said to me it looked me in the eyes, and I shit my pants. He said that as I turned the car, it swooped down alongside his window and looked inside at him. He described it as a demon face with wings. We turned around and went to the gas station, where he threw his boxers away and we sat around drinking pop while we calmed down. I've talked to him a few times since we split, and to this day, he still swears up and down that he saw a flying demon, but refuses to tell people about it because he said it really fucked with his head. TLDR, crazy flying demon almost hit my windshield and made my ex poop his pants. When I was younger I was heavily involved with the Boy Scouts of America. We went on at least one camping trip per month, so I was quite experienced with the outdoors. One such month, I forget when, exactly, my troop was taking a trip to an observatory/planetarium at Kennesaw State University, Georgia. Because we had nowhere to stay on campus, we arranged to camp in some sort of park or reserve, which was the closest available camping spot. Well, it just so happened that the campsite we were assigned was right on the edge of a massive swamp/bayou/wetland thing, so we were heavily warned by the rangers about the possibility of alligators. They said it was natural to see glowing eyes during the night if we got up to use the restroom, and not to worry because the alligators weren't naturally predatory towards people for whatever reason. There were unused trails crisscrossing for miles along the swamp, and we were truly in the middle of nowhere, so the rangers also warned us about venturing too far down the trail. Well, come that afternoon, and, being the lot of foolish 14-year-olds that we were, me and a group of friends decided to explore the trails. We walked for about 35 minutes, and we left markers and stuff so that, were we to get lost, our leaders would know where we went. After a little while we came across a short branch in the trail and decided to take it. It was all grown over, as if it hadn't seen human traffic for months, if not years. At the end the trail stopped and turned into a smallish clearing in the woods. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a single, dead tree. Upon further inspection, we noticed that, carved in the tree, were several weird symbols and diagrams, including a crude depiction of a human body. These absolutely weird images coupled with an eerie lack of natural noise freaked us out, and, needless to say, we quickly noped the fuck out of there. After we returned to our campsite, panting, we tried to explain to our scoutmaster what we had seen, but, because we were A, teens and B, he was already angry with us for disobeying the rules. He said that we were full of it. That night, we had trouble getting to sleep, but, because we had racked up a lot of fatigue that day after all of our various activities, we soon drifted off into an uncomfortable rest. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, I vividly remember checking my watch. I woke up, needing to relieve myself. Drunk with sleep, I stumbled out of my tent into the woods, with only a weak headlamp to provide light. After I finished, I zipped up and started walking back to my tent. You don't know how scary it is walking in the dark with a bunch of fucking glowing eyes all around you, and I immediately regretted not waking my tent mate up to go with me. Now, even though I was pretty unnerved by all of the eyes, something told me that everything was okay because I knew they were just alligators doing their alligator thing. Still pretty freaky, if you ask me. Well, I looked over and saw a pair of the same glowing green eyes hovering about 6 feet above the ground. Now that's odd, I thought. Most alligators are only around 2 to 3 feet high. And that's when I realized it was something else. Whatever it was let out a weird choking/screaming noise, and I immediately began running as fast as I could in the opposite direction, sweat breaking out. Luckily, I ended up back at the campsite, and I ran screaming to my scoutmaster's tent. He jumped out and frantically what was wrong. I told him what happened and he seemed skeptical, and he told me to go back to my tent. I made him accompany me, and we got to the place where my tent was. Rather, where it had been. My tent, my gear, all of my stuff, lay everywhere, in shreds. I rationalized the whole situation with the fact that it was probably just a bear, but then I saw something that made me really scared. There was a crude stone knife stuck into the ground right where my tent had been. From deep in the woods came another awful screech, which woke pretty much everyone else up. Upon seeing and hearing these things, my scoutmaster woke up the remaining people and we quickly packed and left. Although we reported what happened to the rangers, they found nothing but the knife. When they investigated the weird tree place, all they found was the clearing with a hole in the middle, as if a tree had been uprooted. My troop never went camping there again, and I have never visited a swamp since. I had French doors to my room, and often in the middle of the night, 3:14 exactly, always happened at this time, my doors would swing open and wake me up. Not that scary itself, I had always contributed this to a draft or something else similar and logical. Except for one night when I left my lights on. I had mirrored closet doors when my French doors swung open and woke me up. As I looked at the clock and back at the door, I noticed a distortion, like funhouse mirrors, in my mirrored doors moving slowly across my view, probably 15 feet in total, at about walking speed. As soon as the distortion stopped, and my anxiety peaked, my clock radio turned on and turned to static. Which was odd because it was always set on 101.3 the Fox. There was a voice in the background that I couldn't make out, but it was deep and cracked and talking viciously like it had somehow picked up an angry conversation. Needless to say, I slept in the living room for the rest of the night. Man, I get chills just typing this out. Glad I don't live there anymore. I've seen a Sasquatch. Most of my friends that know make fun of me. One says he believes me, but I think he's humoring me. I don't tell anyone anymore. Back in July 2008 I had moved in with my mom and her husband after I graduated high school. They lived up in the mountains and where there were only maybe 3 or 4 other houses all decently spread apart. I went wandering one day, walked for a while. It was maybe 6 o'clock to 7 p.m. midsummer, so it didn't start getting dark until 8:30 to 9 o'clock. There was plenty of light. This wasn't a case of it was getting dark and my eyes were playing tricks on me. I was walking around maybe for 30 minutes and I hear something. Okay, whatever. Probably a deer or something. I keep moving and as I get closer the sound stops. I'm not looking in front of me at this point because I thought maybe the deer took off, so I was trying to find it. I turn my head straight and right there in front of me, maybe 50 to 75 yards-ish, is this thing. I froze initially. I thought OMG bear, then my eyes registered what I was seeing. I don't know how tall. I was terrified, and it was huge and brown with hair matted all over it. I wanted to run or scream or something, but I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed. I should mention that I registered bad smell. It stuck with me because it was awful. I can't 100% attribute that to the Sasquatch because, like I said, 50 to 75 yards, but that's always been one of those things that stuck with me. The thing grunted at me a few times, stomped its legs, and for some reason hit the tree. I don't know if it was trying to warn me off, but it stared me down as it hit this tree and snarled. It felt like forever. Couldn't have been more than a total of 10 seconds before it took off, making this strange howl, hoot sound. I started crying and ran home. I've been researching nonstop since then. I moved in with my boyfriend at the time and my mom got divorced, so I hadn't had the chance to go back, But she has recently started seeing him again, so I'm hoping a friend and I will get to go. This reminds me of a story my grandfather always told us growing up, regarding our family camping spot. Each year, we'd make this huge road trip to a remote area of Canada. No stores, no campgrounds, hell you'd be lucky to see a plane fly overhead. It was just us and the woods and the lake. Anyway, back in the 80s, my grandfather, dad, and uncles went up there by themselves. At night, as we always did, they were sitting around the fire eating chili. A stick cracks 50 or so yards away. Instinctively they all turn flashlights toward the site of the sound. As the lights scan the area, two eyes are reflected back, the way cat's eye do in bright light. They fix the lights on the eyes, recognizing now that it is an animal crossing through. Then the reflected eyes begin rising. Whatever it is they're looking at begins to stand up. The waist-high animal is now on its hind legs, just staring at them. Everything is silent. The standing eyes and the group of men now remain motionless. It didn't take long before they realized this wasn't like all the bears we'd usually see. Whatever it was standing out there was neither bear nor cat, and sent them all running to the truck. For the first time in decades, those 4 grown men slept in the truck, leaving the tents empty. When they woke the next morning, they wanted to go see the prints. The prints belonged to a wolf. They've never been able to explain it, and it's still something we talk about whenever we are up here. When I was about 11, my best friend and I, also 11 at the time, were walking through his dad's woods to get firewood. Keep in mind that we both live in Illinois. My friend, Josh, being the more adventurous one, ran ahead to see if he could grab more firewood than me. Me, being a pussy, ran after him. He was a lot faster than me, so I fell behind pretty quickly. I ran until there was a fork in the trail. I took a left, and I saw Josh stop, kneeling in silence. Of course, I was relieved, until I heard my name behind me. I looked back, and there was Josh. I couldn't comprehend what was going on. I didn't know which Josh was Josh, so I turned toward the Josh I saw kneeling. I called for him, and what I saw next still makes me never want to go to those woods again. Whatever it was about 9 during winter, so it's really dark, looks at me with glowing green eyes, and smiles. I passed out and woke up in his house. The first words Josh said to me were, "Why did you cut through the forest?" I told him I didn't. I said, "You did." He said, "I watched you run through the woods, turn a corner, and you called my name and passed out. I hope the fuck out of that place. I still sometimes go there, but never on those woods again." Spent a lot of time in the woods building forts as a kid with friends. Saw a bear once and a mountain lion on more than one occasion. I was in central Illinois, and both are supposed to be no longer in the area and haven't been for some time. All of these sightings occurred outside of Bartonville, which is a small village near Peoria. This was in the wild, in wooded land that backs up to farmland and more private wooded land. Many river and creek tributaries running through this area. The bear I saw was strolling through a harvested cornfield between 2 sections of woods. My friend and I watched this from about 100 yards. The 2 mountain lion sightings, my friend and I were building a fort on the side of a steep hill that overlooked a small creek tributary and saw it drinking/doing something at the creek bed. We were busy on our fort and we never saw it approach. As it left, it quickly disappeared into the thick underbrush and made no sound at all. The second sighting was a few years later at the edge of the woods around dusk at a house that backed up to the woods. Strangely, in all my years back there I saw tons of wildlife. Deer, raccoons, possums, squirrels, owls, hawks, and coyotes. Even found old graves from settlers. I never once saw wild turkey, and apparently the area is filled with them. Okay, so I rarely tell this story offline, and this is probably the first time I'll tell it online. I don't really think I believe in ghosts, but I can't say that they don't exist. I'm one of those people that will see something and still question it if possible. I honestly cannot question this because it doesn't add up. When I was around 7 or 8, I lived in a big house in Houston, Texas. We had a staircase that went up from the living room to a short hallway that ended with either side being a room. One room was my brother's, the other was the guest bedroom. The guest bedroom faced the road of our quiet neighborhood. My brother's room faced the pool. Basically, if you looked up the staircase from the living room, you'd see a wall and part of the door to the bathroom. Anyway, one late night I'm playing with Legos in the living room. I was having a great time working on a spaceship, as I recall. I don't remember what made me look up that staircase, but I supposed I had happened to glance up there at the perfect time because I fucking saw something. It was a blurry outline, as if the person was wearing white and standing behind frosted glass. This figure had a leash, also a fuzzy white, that led to a small dog. To emphasize, this white fuzz looked a bit like television static but without so much hard black pixels. Lots of gray and white. This figure walked from my brother's room, stopped at the middle of the hallway and looked down at me. The dog continued to move around in small circles. After a few moments of terrifying eye contact, the figure continued to walk into the guest bedroom. There was no sound during all of this. Now, being a young child, I went and told my mother and father. My father retrieved his officer's saber and went to check it out. Absolutely nothing. In fact, the drapes on the guest bedroom had been closed completely and they were too thick for light to get through. My brother's room was empty as he was at college, but because of the angles, there was no way a reflection from the pool could have caused that vivid of an image all the way through the hallway. Even writing this, I'm getting chills in a manner which I do not like. I can still see it. It wasn't light on a wall, but rather it was light that occupied space. I could see the depth of it, even now. There were no real features that could be described. Just white and fuzz. On a similar note, my mother's stories about the bootlegger camps in London are fucking creepy. Old houses built on bootlegger camps are apparently haunted. When I was little, we'd always go camping a few hours west of our hometown for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and we'd always stop at this one camping site because there was only ever 2 or 3 people there at a time. And there would always be moments where I'd see things run out of the bushes/trees, stop, and then run back into the bush. Just pitch black shadows, no eyes, no face. They were like animals painted black, but they'd never be anything, they'd just be there. Never scared me until we got home one day and I saw one in the local national park and felt like they were following me. Every time I'd turn around there'd be one watching, then running away when I'd spot it. My parents would tell me I was just seeing things because I was scared, so I eventually stopped hiking/camping or doing anything outside because I was just too fucking scared. Eventually forgot about it and just agreed it was fear and being a kid. So 15 years later, I'm driving home late at night from university, decide to stop in at my dad's place, which was next to a reserve, cause I'm just too tired. I'm getting out of the car and I felt like I was going to vomit all of a sudden, and I just see this thing run out from behind a tree and stare at me, same black thing I'd seen as a kid. Then it started running towards me. I got back in the car and reversed out of the driveway as fast as I could, and got a speeding ticket on the way home. I lived in an inner city apartment, still do. I outright refused to go to my dad's place, and I'd rather him think it's because I hate his girlfriend than the truth. It makes me want to cry, and I also refuse to go camping with my which he loves. Right now, I'm not too sure what to think of them. This is the most scary/unbelievable thing that has ever happened to me. First, a little background. My brother and I were in San Francisco for a vacation and were planning to go explore Chinatown. As you may or may not know, there are usually very prominent Chinese mob presence in large American Chinatowns. Now getting to the story. Me and the bro are strolling through Chinatown, having a great time, when we both happen to look down this small alley. And I shit you not, there were 2 Chinese men in suits holding another man who looked beaten up. One of them opened a door to a building and the other pushed the man inside and closed it. They proceeded to leave. Being intrigued as fuck, we stayed around for a while, and about 5 minutes later 2 men walked out, one carrying a large duffel bag, the other putting away a handgun into his jacket. We called the police and reported a murder in Chinatown and quickly left. One day later, we got a call from the police asking a few more questions and they said thank you and hung up. I was in Vegas once sometime around 1996. Our cheap-ass hotel room had a gap under the door, enough to get a few fingers through. I was somewhere around 2nd grade and had brought a Batman action figure to keep me occupied. I ended up sticking him under the door a few times for whatever reason. As I pulled it back and a hand followed like it was trying to grab it. It moved around like it was feeling for the figurine and then pulled back. I threw the door open and there was no one there. No doors opening or closing, no elevators or fire escapes near us, not a goddamn sound in the hallway. I still can't figure out how anyone could have disappeared that quick. Even if they sprinted to the room across the hall and the door had been open, I should have heard/seen them closing the door or something. There is a supposedly haunted tunnel near where I live in Lexington, Virginia. According to the legends, a man raped and killed 2 little girls in the tunnel and then killed himself. These people now haunt the tunnel. I'm not a big believer in the supernatural, but when some friends asked me to come with them over the summer, I did. At first, nothing too creepy happened. It was midnight and very dark inside the tunnel, but outside the moon shone brightly. It had rained earlier and there was a small stream running through the tunnel making quiet, ambient noise. So the spooky setting was definitely there. Anyways, after some time, one of my buds asks me to open up my mind and ask the ghost something out loud. I, not fully taking this seriously, ask, if there is a little girl in here, please reach out and touch me. I want to know if you are here. After a good few minutes of not feeling anything, I give up and say that we should just head back because it was getting late. That's when I felt it. I swear on my name that I felt something like a small cold hand grab my own. I freaked out and told my friends to stop screwing with me. But they were all far enough away from me that it was impossible. One of them grabbed my hand. I, still unsure of what I felt, knew that I needed to go back. I have never felt, heard, or seen a ghost up until this point, and I knew that this was as good a place as any for me to start believing. I didn't want to go alone, but I didn't want to go with someone who I knew might screw with me, so a week later I called up my girlfriend and we drove over to the tunnel late at night. I trust her with my life and I knew she wouldn't mess with me during this. During the visit, I asked out loud if the same little girl would contact me again. I asked her if she remembered me and if she could tell me how she died. Right then, I heard a little girl crying. A definite, audible cry. Loud enough for me to hear it, but just quiet enough for me to still question it. My heart sank from the sound while my stomach slammed into my throat. As soon as I heard it, I felt my girlfriend shudder. I asked her if she heard it too. She said, "The crying?" Yes. We slowly exited the tunnel and drove away. We've told a few people what we heard in the tunnel. Most people don't believe it, so we don't really tell too many people, unless they claim they believe. But I know what I heard. My girlfriend knows what she heard. End of story. I have a few stories. The land in my old neighborhood is freaking haunted. I know it is not the houses, yes, houses, because my childhood home was not very old and nobody had died there. Same with the other houses. A lot of my family still lives in this neighborhood, so, first story, I was about 15 and at the house by myself. I decided I needed a snack and head to the kitchen. While making a bowl of cereal I hear the sound of running feet. I have a brilliant moment and call out, "Who's there?" No answer. I hear it again and this time it is closer. All of a sudden I see this kid and he's in old-timey overalls, a shirt, and no shoes. I can see through this kid. He looks at me, laughs, and slings open a dead-bolted door and runs out. Second story, fast forward a few years but same neighborhood. I went to check on my grandparents. Their car wasn't there but figured maybe just my grandpa was gone. Walk in the house, no, they didn't lock their door, and call out. No one answers, so I decide I'll visit later. Start to leave and hear a crash from the bathroom area. I think maybe my grandma was home and couldn't answer me, so I run back there. No one is in there but the shower curtain has been ripped down and is laying on the sink on the other side of the room. Big bathroom, so no way. And the house is a straight shot, so nobody got out through the hall, and the bathroom window is tiny, so I know nobody snuck through it. I have more but not sure if y'all want to read them. When I was about 10 years old, I was on my family's boat. It was me, my parents, my brother, my aunt and uncle, and 2 of my cousins. It was the middle of the day and we were anchored out in the middle of the bay, grilling burgers and whatnot, just having a good time. My dad saw a barge headed for us, so we had to move our boat. Barges are sort of like trains in that it takes them a really long time to stop or turn or anything. Anyways, when my dad went to move the boat, the engine wouldn't start up. He kept trying, nothing. So he started handing us all life jackets saying we were going to have to swim, which really sucked because we were in the middle of the bay with no land in sight. Then out of nowhere, this man and his daughter pull up in a little boat and ask if we needed help. They tied our boat to theirs and pulled us out of the way of the barge. We were really grateful that these strangers helped us out, but a little preoccupied by the close call. We go to put the life jackets back, turn around to thank them, but they were gone. Nowhere to be seen. And we could see a good distance. It was just us and the barge in the bay. There was no way that they could have left that quickly. So we were a little confused, but didn't pay it much attention. Until the next day, when my dad showed us a local paper saying that a man and his daughter were killed in a boating accident in the bay where we were, the morning that we were there. Not really something I saw, but here goes. I experienced an extreme empathetic episode. A few months ago, at work, I got this horrible sinking feeling. The reason was clear as day: I have HIV. Out of the blue. Now, I don't have HIV. I'm married, I'm not extramartially sexually active, have no reason at all to think I have HIV. But I did. What's more, I knew that I'd contracted HIV from a hospital. For weeks this wore on me. I was so scared, and yet totally certain that I had HIV. I dreamed about it, had nightmares about it. I read up on it, researched the treatment options, thought about how I would tell my family. I went back and forth between wanting to take an HIV test, or not. I knew the answer would be positive, and I just couldn't stand to see it on paper, in reality like that. I told my best friend, I told my husband about this feeling I had. Both of them told me I was crazy, and if I would just take a test I would know. But they didn't understand. I had HIV. I wouldn't be able to have kids. I have HIV, and it's not my fault. After weeks of this, I heard a bit of office gossip that made me nearly faint. A coworker's daughter, who worked at a hospital, had been exposed to HIV at work. She just got the call. The test she took was positive. I am 100% certain I was feeling her anxiety. Her knowing, and not knowing. Her fear of the test. Turns out you have to wait a few weeks before you can be tested and get accurate results. Her self-pity over the whole thing. Her thinking her life was ruined and it wasn't her fault. Her constant thinking about it, researching, and dreaming. My hubby doesn't believe it, says it's a coincidence, and if it happens a second time he'll believe. I've always had strange experiences when I meet recently deceased people in my life in dreams. In one of those dreams, an old high school teacher came to me, and when I asked her why me, she said I was the closest one. I see my dad in my dreams, and I ask him to talk to mom instead. He always gives me this look, to say I can only talk to you. I've often wondered if things like this, people, emotions seek out the path of least resistance. And if in some cases, that's me. Ball lightning. When I was about 8 years old, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom as kids. This particular incident occurred during a very intense thunderstorm in the middle of the night. Both my brother and I were already awake due to the thunder. Then there was a sudden crack of thunder. The loudest I have ever heard. The kind so loud that it shook the whole house and rattled the windows. At same instant that this thunder rattled the house, a ball of light passed through the window and above our heads. It was 3 feet above us, moved quickly into the room, seemed to hover, or at least slow, for a short while and then disappeared. The ball itself was light, but not so light as to illuminate the whole room. It was glowing, with changing amounts of yellow/white, red, and light blue color. It was slightly larger than a softball and had arcs/sparks of electricity emerging from its edges. Other than scaring the bejesus out of us, it didn't do any damage. To this day, our parents do not believe us, yet we both have identical accounts of the event.